the number one thing that you kind of see all the time in a business is that you really need to take into consideration is the human component, right? Because basically, whenever you have like a personal problem, that might be whether or not it's a performance or productivity issue or some sort of like behavioral trait or an incongruence between the goals that the entrepreneur, the founder, whatever it is, what they're trying to achieve, and then an incongruence in behavior. So there's a misalignment between what they're doing and what it is they're trying to achieve. Then usually that will manifest itself in the business as a friction point, right? So you need to take the human component into consideration. And because there's this thing where, as humans being, we're basically engineered to consistently try to get from point A to point B, right? We want to build a bridge from where we are to where we want to go, right? We always have an ambition line, right? We want to grow, we want to expand, we want to develop, we want to evolve ourselves, right? It's evolution. And it's dopamine that drives us forward towards something, right? We are driven by nature. We feel best when we are driven. However, there is a key point to this, and that is that while that is the driver in human behavior, we also have a brake. And that brake is fear, because even though, you know, we haven't changed that much in the last 10,000 years, right? We are still by nature hunters and gatherers biologically, right? That's how we're hardwired in our brain neurologically. And so while we're trying to pursue something, right, to achieve something, to grow, to expand, to reach a goal, and are highly driven towards it, right? Our thoughts are continuously centered around driven towards something. But we also have fears, a brake that's holding us back because we want to survive, right? Survival takes precedence over an advantage, basically, right? And so from a biological standpoint, the objective, the primary objective isn't to necessarily sprint or intensely pursue a goal or an advantage or more resources, is to merely stay alive. Because the longer we are here present, the higher the chances of us, you know, finding a niche where we can survive and gather resources, where we can procreate and pass on the genes, right? So we want to survive first and foremost. So we have this fear instilled in us, this brake mechanism. And there's obviously there's fear for having our basic human needs met, which means that, you know, we fear violence and conflict, we fear, you know, physical harm and dangers and things like that, hunger. But we also feel fear towards to being ostracized socially from the community that we are a part of, right? And the reason for why that fear is so incredibly deeply rooted inside ourselves is basically because 10,000 years ago, if I was expelled from my tribe, I was basically fucked, right? I would no longer have access to the resources and the protection from that tribe. So social anxiety and social fear of failure, right? In the eyes of others, fear of loss of status is an actual huge friction point, right? And it's often the root cause of self-sabotage. However, fear of success is also a huge resisting point sometimes, right? So we have these self-limiting beliefs. Now you might ask yourself, why fear of success? Why should we fear success? Well, if you succeed within a social community or a tribe, that means you naturally take on the leadership position, and when you take on a leadership position, you are at risk because you are standing out from the crowd, taking on more responsibility. And so basically, risk is responsibility. So if you take on yourself a responsibility and a commitment towards something, it also means that you take on risk. And risk is a danger, right? Because if we cannot fulfill on that promise, that responsibility that we committed ourselves to, right, in the eyes of the tribe or our social community, then it will devaluate our status and maybe have dire consequences. So this is actually a huge issue, that fear is holding us back. And so the obvious question then becomes, how do we fight that fear that's basically blocking us and holding us back? Because at the root cause of like a self-limiting belief and most objections, right, is an emotional state of fear, right? So if we have like a thought pattern, basically a self-limiting belief, or basically it's an excuse, it's an emotion wrapped in a verbalization, right? Which means that we verbalize that deeply rooted emotion, right? And so fear is a base emotion, right? And so what happens is we wrap it in a verbal afterthought or after rationalization, a description or a label. So I don't have time, I don't have money, I don't have the necessary character traits, or I can't do it, or it's impossible, or whatever. That's basically just a verbalization or a label we put on that root emotion of fear. So how do we overcome that? So, because basically if we can move, and that's what often happens, is if we push the drive mechanism in ourselves while we also push the brakes. So imagine you have a car and you push the gas pedal and the brakes at the same time. What happens? Friction, right? And that is very draining and very tiresome. So some of the most burned out people that has the highest level of stress is actually those people that has very high ambitions and very high goals and standards. They want to pursue something, they're highly driven towards something, but their fear is at the same level or even higher. So they're hitting the gas pedal and the brakes at the same time. So when you act as a coaching consultant, right, and that's where the coaching aspect comes into it, it's not enough for you to just give them the frameworks, the models, the diagnostics of their business and tell them how they can implement and grow and make more revenue, all that good stuff. You also actually need to compel them to take action. And of course, it's always best to work with people that has a very high level of this inertly within themselves, right? They're intrinsically driven, they have a low fear level and a high drive level, so they get shit done. But that might not always be the case. And so some people might have a deeply rooted self-limiting belief, and imagine that it's a cyclical loop, right? So if you have a label or description or verbalization of a fear emotion that's blocking someone, it reinforces the emotion that then reinforces the label that reinforces the emotions. So you can attack both states. If you can remove the fear, you can remove the self-limiting belief. And if you can remove the self-limiting belief or the label or the description of the viewpoint, you can also remove the emotion. However, it's always easier to change someone's behavior from a resourceful state, right? It's always easier to change someone's behavior if they are in a highly resourceful state. So there's two components to this. If you want to break down a self-limiting belief, to remove that constraint internally inside themselves so they can move forward. And that is actually, well, there's actually three components. Number one, you have to actually apply accurate thinking and show from a pure, objective, logical standpoint, right, reframing the narrative around that label and around that emotion to show that's it completely untrue. And some fears might actually be valid, so you can't bullshit your way through it. If the fear and concerns are valid, you can't talk your way out of it. Then you have to address it, you have to problem solve, you have to figure out a solution or get clarity around that problem or that fear or that self-limiting belief or that objection against the action plan that you have for them, for your client. But if the fear is completely illogical and you can actually disprove it logically, then you would think, well, I just disproven this completely irrational fear. That doesn't do anything for a client, right? Because fears, emotions are irrational by nature, right? We have the logical part of the brain, right? And we have the emotional part of the brain. It's two separate units. So you might have addressed the concerns of the thought pattern, but not the emotional pattern. So what you want to do is you want to first completely disprove it by logic, right? Address the logical part of the brain, and then you dive deeper into the layers, into the emotions. And the way you do this is you start by converting or pivoting that less resourceful state or that negative state to something where they are resourceful, right? They feel a resourceful emotion in themselves. If they are in a resourceful state, you can then start to really address the fear with the next framework. But first you have to take them out of that less resourceful state. So how do you do that? Well, when people are compelled to pursue a goal, right? It's more often than not, I will almost say always, because there's something within themselves that drives them towards that goal because they believe somewhere in themselves that they can achieve it, right? We are not compelled to pursue goals that we don't believe is possible, right? So there's something within themselves that thinks that they can achieve this goal and that it will be highly beneficial. So you need to dig those can-do indicators out and shine a spotlight on them, right? So can-do indicators is kind of like a concept from psycho-cybernetics, which is highly useful when you do, I highly encourage that you study it if you do any type of coaching, because the self-image and the identity and how it works with the cerebral mechanism in the brain is just so useful when you're trying to change people's behavior, because it's the operating system of the brain, right? And most coaching methods or methods for behavioral change actually more or less always builds on either action or identity change, right? So you can change your identity through actions, or you can step into a new identity and then it will change your action. It's a loop. Both things work, right? But it's always easier to control our actions because it's movement, right? Whereas beliefs and things like that are emotional states and thought patterns. Anyways, little sidetrack here. But the way you dig out those can-do indicators is from their memory banks. They will have certain memories or images in their brains, certain beliefs that thinks that they might be able to do it, right? So why do they think that they can achieve this goal, right? What compelled them to pursue it in the first place? And then what you can also do is you can basically also ask them to reflect back upon or imagine a past situation where they were highly competent, highly driven in the pursuit of a goal that they achieved. Because when you do that, right, when you evoke that memory in their brain, it also turns on that highly resourceful emotional state. And that can carry on to something else, right? So you can remove the thought pattern and basically, so you can switch thought patterns, but the emotional state lingers, right? So what you do is you put them in a highly resourceful state by having them imagine all these can-do indicators as, why did they think initially that they could actually do this, pursue this goal? And what were other instances of them being highly resourceful, right? Achieving something, being successful. And it doesn't have to be like a large thing. It can be a small thing, just something where they pursued a thing, had follow through, they took action, pursued a thing with dedication, right? They were consistent, and then they had a beneficial result, right? They had success. Put them have them imagine or think back upon that memory or that experience. So it will turn on the emotional state. And then what you do is then you future pace them, and then you basically say, well, imagine that you were just as successful in the pursuit of this goal. So all of a sudden you switch thought pattern and you switch vantage point in their mind to this future state. And so the feeling carries over, right? And so now they are in a highly resourceful state, and they are now in that future-paced state where they think that they have already achieved the outcome, right? They have the solution. They are now in that new state where they have achieved their goal, right? And so you took them from past, right? Past can-do indicators, past memories of success. Then you transported their vantage point, or they reframed their perspective into that future state where they have achieved their outcome. So now that emotional state of being highly resourceful is carried over to that future-paced state. So that means we have now marked or anchored that resourceful state to that future outcome. So we have the pull emotion towards that goal. And then you want to shift that vantage point to their present state. So you then transport them back by saying, so now we move to where you are today in the current situations. We now know that you can absolutely achieve this future goal or outcome, and they are in this resourceful state. And then you shift to say, so what will it take, right? And we have to understand that fear emotion is still lingering down there. So how do we fight it? And this is basically the ultimate framework for it, because you fight fear with fear, right? So the emotion fear, and then you have an acronym of fear. And that acronym for me stands for focus, energy, aggression, and resilience, right? Focus, and so you have to have clarity before you can have focus, right? So that's why we took them through this whole point A to point B, acting as their their consult, and we coached them into this resourceful state. And so now we can say, we need to focus in on the action plan. And that means they need to sacrifice all the other shit, right? That is not conducive to them reaching that goal. So focus, right? And the next step is energy. So when we are focused, we start to use our energy to push towards that goal. So by focusing in, we can basically allocate energy, right? Actions. That is what that is, actions. Energy is actions. That's what we use energy for. It's movement, right? So we know what it is we're pursuing. We dedicate ourselves to using our energy towards it. And when I say energy, I mean in relation to basically dopamine, right? So focus is blocking out all that other shit that isn't conducive to the goal, right? Or like in an 80-20 ratio. So 80% is goal-oriented, goal-driven behavior. So 80% of their time, 80% of the resources, 80% of their action should go towards it, and 20% is for rest and recovery and family and relations if you really want to push forward towards that goal. Now, energy, right? Because although we measure our life in time, and we like to think that time allocation towards a goal is the number one thing that is going to get us there. That is true, because time can be a constraint we put around our everyday action that drives us towards something. So time is basically a container in which we can direct energy. So we can say, this time block we will do this. So time is basically a container, but it's not the thing itself that propels us forward towards our goal. That is action and energy and effort, right? And so what is energy at a very basic level, right? So we know we eat, we get energy, we're energized, but what does it mean? It's dopamine. Dopamine is the driving neurotransmitter of the brain, right? That's what it does. It drives us forward. It links basically pleasure to effort. And so it's very important that 80% of their time that they spend is output driven, right? That means we are driven towards something. We have an output of action, which also means we do not input things. So consumption of media, consumption of food, right? Digestion also slows you down. Consumption of basically everything, right? So we limit consumption because consumption in and of itself elicits dopamine. So we drain our dopamine, which is energy. So by limiting consumption, right, and focusing on output and exertion in 80% of our time, we can drive ourselves towards our goal, and we can link that energy and that sense of pleasure towards pursuing our goal, right? But if we have, if we have task switching, right, we jump back and forth between output and consumption, right? It's going to drain you, right? So you want to have your day curve in one big arc, right? One big block, output. End of day, consumption, right? So it's basically also the nervous system, right? It's the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, right? Action towards something, rest and recover, right? Hunger, rest and digest, right? Exertion, relaxation. Do the exertion part first, right? And at the end of the day, when you spend your time working really, really fucking hard towards your goal and you switch to consumption mode, right? The thing you consume, like the food, the media, the social interactions, things like that, the new learning or whatever it is you take in the evening is going to be so pleasurable, and it will basically shut down your central nervous system and get you into rest and digest mode, and then you rest and recover until the next day where it starts over. That's the day cycle. So you push your energy towards your goal like this, and you link dopamine to effort. Now, if you cloud that block of time where you are supposed to be in pursuit of your goal with consumption of things that elicit dopamine, you're going to basically you're going to mutter up I'm Danish, so I don't know how to express this, but it's going to mix together what the fuck is it called? The elicitation of dopamine, or the secretion of dopamine. You're going to link that together with consumption and output at the same time. So it's basically, if you're trying to be creative and think logical at the same time, it doesn't fucking work. Choose one or the other, right? You oscillate between the two states, and what I'm saying is you need to oscillate in a big curve where start of the day, output, right? Effort. So that's energy. So focus, energy. Allocate your energy towards those primary actions, those behavioral things you can control that drives you towards your goal, right? So although you set yourself an outcome or a goal, your real goal is to be congruent in behavior with that goal, so the results will produce themselves, right? Because you can't manifest or force a result, right? You can't manifest or force or control an outcome, but you can control your actions that will lead to that outcome or that results. And then it's just a matter of sticking with it, right? And iterating and course correction until you reach your goal. So, next step, focus, energy, that's allocated towards your goal. Next step, aggression, right? You need to become fucking aggressive, right? You need to brute force that shit and push forward. It's so incredibly important that you push forward with aggression. Because basically, if you're not if you're not pursuing something with forward momentum and drive aggressively, right, trying to overcome that resistance, you are in a state of inertia or you are deteriorating. There is no such thing as balance, or even when you drive a bike, right, you are balancing, but you're basically just controlling counter movements. I don't know if that was the best example, but top of mind, while you are in forward motion, right? So forward motion, and that needs to have, you need to have aggression, right? You need to have a will and a drive to overcome those challenges and those obstacles. Because again, aggression is an opposing feeling of fear, right? So it's like if you have hot water and you have cold water, those two things can't coexist in the same container, right? So so if you mix hot water and cold water, you will get lukewarm water, right? And so by going through all of these other things, you basically decrease the amount of cold water or fear, right? And by having a larger proportion of hot water or aggression, anger, right, driven away from pain and pulled toward that goal, that pleasure that we established by getting people in a resourceful state, changing their vantage point. So when we now mix those two things together, because both things will always be present, right, almost like a yin and yang thing, right? So always have some level of fear because it needs to be there. You need to have like that lingering fear thing that consistently scans the environment for problems or things that could threaten our very existence, right? So it will always be present. You can't completely turn it off. And if you can, you're a fucking psycho. So, and even a psycho, and I know because I met them, they will feel fear if you threaten them with violence. So fear is present, right? It's not like psychos don't feel emotions or fear. They just don't feel empathy, right? Just to clarify that. They can be shit scared in certain circumstances. Anyways, you have a very low degree of cold water or fear and a very high degree of hot water or aggression, ambition, energy, focus, all of those things, the resourceful state from, changing their vantage point, find can-do indicators, future pacing them. And so when you pour that that huge gallon of boiling water on top of that very little tiny little slump of water in a glass that's cold, it's mixed together and the overall result is that it's still fucking hot and you are driven forward, right? So it's a matter of proportion or ratio, right? So that's basically the whole process you go through. So aggression. And aggression can be an anchor state, right? So when you meet someone that is highly aggressive, and I don't mean aggressive in like being mean to people, I mean aggressive meaning that you take outward driven actions towards your goal. So when that happens, and you meet someone, there's certain character traits or actions that you can decode from them. Usually they have like almost eagle eyes, right? They don't have passive eyes, they have eagle eyes, right? And they almost look angry, right? They have a game face. That's why it's called a fucking game face, because it's fucking game on. They're aggressive in the pursuit of their goals. So you need to have a game face, right? And so you can practice that, just like you can practice smiling in a mirror, right? It's been shown that if you stand in front of a mirror and smile for 5 minutes, the very action of smiling, again, it's a feedback loop between emotion and an emotion, right? Emotion. So by standing and practicing your game face, you can actually initiate that highly driven state if you don't know how it feels like, right? But you should be in a state of drive, right? You should be in a state of aggression, right? And also focus starts with the eyes. So when you're directing your energy, you're highly focused, you got the eagle eyes, you're aggressive. What is that? That is forward fucking drive towards your goal, right? Aggression. You move forward, right? In a fight, you move forward to dominate, right? In a war, what do? You advance, right? You gain terrain, right? What does a business do? It expands its reach. It expands its brand, people's awareness of the brand, right? It increases its revenue. It's forward-driven and it's an expansion, right? And at the baseline of all those different, manifestations is the emotion of aggression, right? Again, not being mean, but just the will to expand and move forward, right? And you maintain that momentum and drive. And the way you maintain that aggression, that momentum, is because you're allocating your energy towards your goal, right? You prioritize and allocate your energy towards that goal, and you are focused, right? You have your blindness on. And that means you fucking move forward, right? And the last thing of the FEAR formula is resilience, right? Because you are going to encounter obstacles. It's inevitable. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be problems that you need to solve, right? There's going to be constraints that you need to remove. And it's going to take time, right? And you're going to make failures. You're going to get knocked on your ass and fall flat on your face. And so you need to be resilient. And so what does resilience mean? Resilience means if you're highly resilient, you bounce back as quick as possible and move forward, right? So resilience is linked to durability, which means that you can keep going, even facing opposition, facing obstacles, facing problems, just pounding against that wall until you break through, right? That's all it is. And if you get knocked down, you get up quick, right? So resilience in physiological terms means that you return to the baseline state, right? As quick as possible. And so if your baseline state is being highly driven towards your goal and you encounter an obstacle or a failure, then instead of, ruminating on that failure, or you just get back up on the horse, right? You cowboy the fuck up and you move forward again towards that obstacle. And you don't shun from that obstacle. You don't move away from that problem, because here's the thing. The problems are your road signs, right? Because it's basically like a coin. It has two sides. At the other side of a problem is a solution, and the solution is the path forward. And so you identify the problems, the obstacles that you need to overcome, and you see them as challenges. You move forward towards them with focus, with energy, with aggression, and you are resilient when you problem solve and try to move that constraint, right? And you are resilient also in durable, meaning that you put in the time, you dedicated your time, your energy, your resources, your focus, you're committed and you're consistent in moving towards that problem and solving it. And then at the other end of that is a solution, and that solution is you moving towards the next problem or the next constraint, right? So, and then you basically just work your way through the milestones. And even if the path isn't completely clear, then whenever you solve a problem and get to the other end of it, a solution opens up, but there's also a new problem. So you just seek towards that problems and you solve them. And that's all it is. And so you fight the fear with fear. Focus, energy, aggression, resilience. 4. But before you can use focus, energy, aggression, and resilience, you need, like we talked about, you need to decrease the amount of fear and increase the volume of positive, resourceful emotions, right? And so you do that by also overcoming that self-limiting belief, the label or this description of that emotion of fear. And you do that by basically proving that it's wrong. Like we said, you prove logically that their self-limiting beliefs, their objections or whatever, is completely wrong. It's a fallacy. You move them back in time, right, to those can-do indicators, to things that had them pursue that goal initially, move them back in time to those can-do indicators, so you shine a spotlight on them, and you move them towards other experiences of being highly successful. So you initiate that resourceful state. I'm just recapping here. That resourceful state, right? Then you transport their perspective or vantage point to that future outcome, which means that the emotion of being in a resourceful state, it lingers and is transported and anchored to that future outcome, right? And you then reiterate why it's possible, why it's beneficial, why it's worth paying the price to get there. And then you move it back into the present moment and say, listen, you need to dedicate yourself to that. Dedication, consistency, commitment. You have a sense of obligation to reach this goal. You basically fucking decide, right? And commit yourself to acting on it, right? And by now, that threshold towards taking action, that friction, that initial resistance, the barrier to start, right? The barrier of entry, the threshold for taking action has been reduced so far because the fear is so low, the drive is so hard, and then basically you just move them through the fear formula, right? So focus. What is it that they need to lock into, and what do they need to remove or give up, or, you know, because that's all focus is. You remove things, so you focus on only one thing. It's shining a spotlight on something, right? A convergence point towards something. And then you basically move to energy and say, okay, so how do we optimize our energy towards this one thing, right? How do we plan our day structure? How do we prioritize our energy and the container around the energy, which is time, right? So basically you have focus, you have energy, and that's aggression. You reiterate the aggressive drive towards achieving this goal, right? It might be pain, or, you know, things that pushes them forward, or they are driven to seek away from. You reinforce that pain, and you reinforce the pull, right? So push-pull. So they become aggressive. I really fucking want that, and I really fucking hate that, so I'm moving forward right now, right? The current state that they're in feels like it has to change, and it has to change now, right? They get to this point where they say, never again. I will not stand still with inertia in this situation any fucking more. Doesn't matter if it's one small step, but I'm taking that step right fucking now, and I'm not looking back, right? They're willing to pay the price, do what's required to reach the goal. They're aggressive, right? And that's what it is. When you step into a fight, you're willing to risk yourself, right? And get your fucking hands dirty and pay the price, right? So aggression, right? Anger. And aggression is the opposing emotion of fear. So it further heightens that ratio. And then it's resilience. And resilience is just, listen, whatever happens, I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm going to be durable. I'm going to keep moving forward. You know, shit is going to happen. I'm going to encounter problems. I'm going to encounter resistance. But whatever it is that needs to be done for me to reach that goal, I'm going to fucking do it. I'm going to be resilient. I'm going to be durable. I'm going to move forward. Fear, right? And that is how you fucking reach your goal in the real world. And that's how you're supposed to act if you are both a consultant, right? You help people grow their, I know this was a huge side track here, but it's so incredibly important that you also know these psychological triggers in people, because you can have the best fucking plan, the best fucking blueprint. You could have diagnosed every aspect of their business, optimized everything from fucking grabbing attention, lead generation, moving people through pipelines, you know, building out the perfect marketing ecosystem that funnels people through top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel, they fucking convert. Right? You can have the retention in order, you can have the ascension of the value ladder. Oh, you can have a plan for all of that shit, right? All of it. You can have the math locked into that, but if they're not going to fucking take action on it because they have some objection or some belief that it can't be done, right? Or they might just doubt you as a coach and consultant, right? And so the plan, right? So if you are on a consultation call, or I don't like a sales call, I like to run workshops so you can really work with people. And then they can decide if they want to continue working with you, right? And so I like to front load it with time, which means that you're going to close more because you give them results in advance. But that result is not only the action plan or the steps or the blueprint or the immediate result for how to achieve something. It's also the emotion that they walk away with, right? So if you can basically help people to change their sense of identity, their perspective on things, how they feel about things, their beliefs around things, right? You really change the way that they act, right? And so the reason why I like not just to map out a plan, but really also work on the psychological aspect of it, because if you map out a plan first and then you basically walk them through that initial result, whatever it is, that small initial activation point, that small initial result, if you're present there and you reinforce the way they feel and think about things, right? And you put them on a trajectory towards their goal, and they walk away with that sense of focus, energy, aggression, resilience, right? And they're committed, they're dedicated, they have clarity because they have a fucking plan, and they have confidence in you and in the plan because you just solved whatever problem it is that you decided to solve right then and there on that fucking workshop session with them, right? They're gonna walk away from that situation, and it's going to be so embedded and ingrained within them, right? It's clarity, it's a plan, it's trust in you, you give them a result in advance, you change the way they perceive themselves and their situation, they feel confident in not only in you, in the plan, but they also know you and they will trust you. And so it's very easy to close such a client, right? Because who else can do that? And that's the thing. If you want to be a consultant and a coach at the highest level, you need to master that coaching aspect of it, right? You need to have both. You need to be both a coach and consultant. And that's why we call it pro coach and consulting, because we are both, right? We don't only work on the vehicle towards their goals, which is the vehicle, the method, the plan, the growth optimization, the diagnostic of their business model, right? It's that the blueprint for how we can get them to whatever goal it is they have for their business, whether that be scale, growth, expansion, optimization, doesn't fucking matter. We have all the tools, the systems, the structures, the frameworks, the diagnostics tools to figure out exactly how we can get them that beneficial result. But that's just a vehicle, right? That's just a vehicle. The internal thing, right? That's the vehicle, that's the consultation, that's the advice. But the internal, their emotional state, that's the coaching component, right? And so you need to master both. You need to be, if you want to be a pro at this, you need to both have the ability to coach people and to offer them the advice that they can then use to achieve their goal, right? It's internal, it's external, and it's the vehicle. And so in sense of, you can say that the coaching is the internal aspect, and you can say that the vehicle is the plan, the roadmap, the resources we enable them with so they can reach their goals. So what is the external? Well, the external is your accurate description, assessment, judgment call, definition of their current situation. It's you giving them clarity, right? That's the major point here. And so what you have is starting point, right? They start here at point A. They have an ambition line, something they want to achieve, which is always a growth path up and forward to point B, the outcome, the external situation that they seek. And there's a vehicle which is the milestones, the plan, the strategies, the tactics, the operational frameworks to get them there, the business model, the ecosystem, the optimizations, the pipeline, the marketing funnel, the digital assets, the list, all of that good stuff in digital marketing and scale and growth development. That is the vehicle, right? That is the mechanics of it, right? But at that base level, for them to be able to climb that mountain and move up, right? You need to have the internal state aligned with both the plan and the goal, right? So clarity for where it is they want to go, confidence in the plan, the systems, the structure, the tools, the tactics, and then an internal drive towards it, where you basically increased fear, focus, energy, aggression, resilience, decreased the emotional fear, the actual emotion, right? And then they will progress towards their goal. And then your job as a coach and consultant is to basically course correct them, help them make the right judgment calls, make the right assessments, and keep giving them that clarity, right? And that belief in the plan and where it is they need to go. And that's how you act as a business coach and consultant, if you're a pro, right?